Just this week, the U.S. Supreme Court has cleared the way for Texas to use a new congressional map that could help the Republican effort to shore up their majority in the coming 2026 midterm elections. But not just Texas, but other states have now entered what I'm calling the redistricting arms race. What does this mean for representation in your state? What does this mean for the control of Congress? And what will this mean for the next 2 years of the Trump administration? It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Eric Claville, and you're joining me for our Redistricting Arms Race Update Show. Once again, we want to thank all of you for joining us, as you always do, on this beautiful Sunday morning that we're having here in Hampton Roads, Virginia. And we know it's a little crisp everywhere. It's definitely a little chilly here. Make sure you're staying safe and warm. But as we broadcast from none other than the campus of the Norfolk State University, home of the Spartan Nation, from none other than WNSB Hot 91, the soul of VA. You know, we are at the end of the year. It's been a great 2025, and I'd like to give a shout out to all of the graduates of universities across the country, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and more specifically to the graduates that walked across the stage on yesterday here at Norfolk State University. What a great accomplishment. You are now the future. You're going out to do great things. You're prepared to go into this world and make your mark in the place where, yes, we see the future in you. Once again, congratulations to all the graduates and the families as well. Well, you know, all this year we've been covering the election here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we have our new slate of delegates that are getting ready to enter the office, and also our new governor and lieutenant governor, attorney general. So now, the day after that election here in politics, we all know that once that election is done, the next day, what starts? Campaigning for the upcoming election. That's right. So, you know, we have, of course, the entire U.S. House of Representatives and Congress up for re-election next year in 2026. And this is what we call the midterm elections. And the reason why we call it the midterm elections is because it's in the middle of a presidential term. That's right. In 2026, end of it for the most part, will be the middle of President Trump's administration, his second term in office. And with that, we'll have a new House that will govern in 2027. Well, and then not only that, but also 1/3 of the U.S. Senate is up for re-election. And this year we have U.S. Senator Mark Warner that has announced he's running for re-election one more time. So, of course, there's a lot of speculation on who here in the Commonwealth on the Republican side will run against him. He has a lot of seniority. Serves on the National Security Committee for the Senate and other very influential commerce committees as well. And again, a senior senator, former governor here in the Commonwealth, very similar to our other U.S. Senator, Tim Kaine, who is also a senior member there in Congress and a former governor. So you kind of see the trajectory, right? But, you know, with that, we'll also see what happens in the Senate. There may be a new majority there, or there may be a slimmer majority. Who knows? But one thing we do know is that elections will come and elections do have consequences. But this election is a little different. It feels a little different because it is a little different. From my recollection, this is the first time I know since I've been following politics and studying politics for the last 35 years for the most part. I've never seen our states engage in pre-midterm redrawing of congressional districts prior to the election. Primarily because, you know, if you think about it, if you look at the Voting Rights Act and the challenges to fair voting that we've had, that was basically stalled because we had a Justice Department and a Supreme Court that supported the Voting Rights Act. I don't think you would have seen this prior. But because of, starting with Shelby County versus Holder, during the time of President Obama's second term in office, where it was challenged, the pre-clearance portion of the Voting Rights Act, which basically said that states that normally would have discriminated or historically discriminated against African Americans and others for voting rights had to clear their maps before they can be used by the Justice Department, which basically used the Voting Rights Act and the 1964 Civil Rights Act to determine if those districts were constitutional. Well, since that portion was gutted, this is what we have now. We have a Supreme Court that it's rolling back the protections of voters, not just the ability to vote, but also where you vote and impacting your vote, such as redistricting, which is basically drawing lines where people live that they can vote for their representatives. Now, there are different types of lines that are drawn that are determined to be unconstitutional, and that is dilution of vote, where you basically draw out a minority group that basically will not have any power. No matter how you vote, it's a majority district, and it's just simply not going to elect or elect a challenger. Also, you have packing, where you pack a large group of individuals, more specifically minorities, in a district, and therefore they only have one representative or an opportunity for one as opposed to many or more than one. So you have those types. But now we find in our country where the president asks and is really spearheading this effort for states that are very strong Republican in order to redraw their lines before the midterm elections. Now, lines are usually drawn at the end of a U.S. census, right? So every 10 years. And we've already redrawn lines. This is 2025. We've done that in 2020 from the U.S. census before the election. Well, because populations shift, right? People grow up, people sell houses, people go here and there. So you have to look at where your population is. It's primarily for commerce, but also for voting. And now we find where in the middle of a U.S. census year, we see these lines being pushed and redrawn. Unprecedented, absolutely unprecedented. But this is what we have. This is the way that we're governing. This is how we are moving in our country. So again, this is primarily pushed, or exclusively pushed by the White House to push this in order to help shore up their majorities, the Republican majorities in midterm, because, yes, the Republican Party now, they're polling at a historical low. Also, the president's polling is lower because of their policies, the policies that the White House is championing, and then also that the Republican Congress, are also standing tall on as well and passing, right? So really, it's an economic. This is all economics, and a lot of people are worried about democracy. But if you redraw the lines and X out individuals who are going to challenge you, then you have a chance to keep your majority. It's interesting when you have the majority that says, I've heard it all the time, play by the rules, play fair, and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, earn it. Well, when you play by the rules, but the rules doesn't fit what you want and you have the power, guess what you have the power to do? Change the rules. So that's what we're seeing. This is a changing of the rules for congressional districts which will have a huge impact across the board. In the second part, we're going to take a look at where our state is, our Commonwealth, and where other states are. But what I want to do now is take a look at what this decision actually means. So according to BBC and other news outlets, the Supreme Court has cleared the way for Texas to use a new congressional map that could help the Republican effort shore up their majority in the coming 2026 midterm elections. Now, last week's Thursday's unsigned decision comes after Texas filed, an emergency request last month to block a lower court ruling that blocked the new map, which was passed by the state legislature and signed into law by Republican Governor Greg Abbott back in August. So here's what happened. In an apparent, according to BBC, it was a 6-3 decision, right? 6 Republicans voted for it. The 3 Democrats or the 3 liberals on the Supreme Court voted against it. I'm going to read the dissenters in just a moment, but what I want to do is read primarily what the Supreme Court said in their decision, the majority. They said the Supreme Court said in its preliminary evaluation of this case, Texas satisfied the conditions for emergency relief and that the lower court committed at least 2 serious errors. Now, here's what they're saying. They're not really deciding upon the legitimacy of the map itself, but they're talking about the errors of the lower court. Now, here's what's happened. There was the Texas legislature redrew maps and basically giving Republicans more seats, up to 5 seats in the state of Texas for congressional seats, okay? So you had a map, they redrew it, Republicans plus 5, just from redrawing. Again, this is not a year you redraw maps, right? But because they got the majority, in the state legislature, they can do this. So here's what's happened. They redrew it. The state legislature passed it, and the governor signed it. This was back in August. But there was an appeal, of course, challenge to it, and the lower federal court said, no, you cannot use this map. You can't implement this map at all. So what does Texas do? Texas then goes to the U.S. Supreme Court, files for emergency relief, and therefore they get it, they grant it, and then the court majority rule up on that particular piece. However, the 3 liberal justices dissented. They said, quote, the district court, which is the federal court, improperly inserted itself into an injunction primary campaign, causing much confusion, upsetting the delicate federal-state balance in elections, the order actually reads. Now, what we're finding here, again, that was the decision, part of the decision from the majority, right? Now, not the liberal, not the dissent. But they said in November, a lower Texas court said evidence indicated the new voting districts were, here we go, racially gerrymandered, and ordered the state to use the congressional lines they had in place before the redistrict earlier this year. And in the U.S., gerrymandering is the redrawing of electoral boundaries to favor a political party. It's only illegal if it's based on race. Now, here's, again, the lower court said, listen, these maps are based clearly on race, right? They gerrymandered, and that's really what they did. So they did gerrymander it to favor the Republican Party, but once again, it became racially gerrymandered because of the districts primarily that were diluted or eliminated, which were minority districts. Now, according to BBC, challenges to mid-decade redistricting came after the Democrat lawmakers in Texas fled the state over the summer to stall voting on a new map, helping trigger a race across other states to change their maps too. Now, we're going to get to other states and what they're doing, but what I want to also highlight here is that the Supreme Court marks this as a win for President Trump. The new map, here's the impact of it. Here's the impact. The new map itself could add up to 5 Republican seats for midterm elections as the party fights to keep its narrow majority. And the president had filed a brief asking the top court to rule in favor of Texas. Yeah. Listen, when you have power, this administration and the Republicans now in states that favor the president's agenda are showing us, you better use it. And they are using it to change, not just implement policy, but also change the rules around it. Now, once again, the lower court, the district court said this is racially gerrymandering, which is illegal. It's unconstitutional. So you can't do it. The U.S. Supreme Court said the lower court should not have inserted that. They inserted themselves and also kind of in a process that wasn't fully done and so forth and so on. But ultimately, they rule not on the gerrymandering of the actual map itself, but really the process and what the court did. Now, here's what happened. Here's what the liberals stated. In a very lengthy dissent, liberal Justice Elena Kagan said, quote, that this map disserves the millions of Texans whom the district court found were assigned to their new districts based on their race, unquote. Now, the 3 conservative justices on the court in a brief concurrent opinion rejected the notion that Republicans redrew the electoral maps based on race. Really? Okay, if you take a look at the maps, you'll see clearly that racial groups are basically disadvantaged because of this. Now, it was also stated by the 3 justices in a concurrent opinion, Justice Alito, Gorsuch, and Clarence Thomas. Now, these 3 justices represent the strong arm of the conservative arm of the court. Now, you have 3 other Republican Supreme Court justices that are not as extreme, but they're more moderate, but they are conservative. And then, so now you have the 3 liberal justices that are, and Justice Elena Kagan that wrote the dissent, having a very lengthy discussion about this. And then you have the 3 far right conservative justices that are saying it is indisputable that the impetus to adopt the Texas map and subsequently the redrawn map in California was partisan advantage, pure and simple. Partisan, pure and simple. Well, yeah. So it's Republican versus Democrat, but the way that you see the parties and how they align in these states is clearly you have more individuals of one race in one party and more individuals in another race on the other side. And you also look at who disadvantages who. But the conservatives say they agree with the lower court, this is illegal race gerrymandering. The conservatives say, nope, purely partisan and simple advantage. That's it. So what did the Texas governor do? Well, Texas Governor Abbott celebrated, according to BBC, the legal victory, praising the high court for restoring the state's redistricting map, saying, we won. Texas is officially and legally more red. He's also stated that he said the new congressional districts better align our representation in Washington, D.C. with the values of our state. This is a victory for Texas voters, for common sense, and for the Constitution, he said. Now, once again, when you take a look at this decision and what it's about keeping power, changing the rules to keep power. Once again, there was no reason for these maps to be redrawn. No reason other than, as I agree with the conservative judge, he said, purely, not the purely part, but a partisan to give an advantage, right? Partisan advantage, to give a Republican advantage. But the way that they had to do it, they had to gerrymander the districts, which they did. And what made it unconstitutional, I agree with the lower court, because race was a part of that. So, but whoever controls the pen, whoever controls the majority, whoever controls the pen, the majority in the Supreme Court controls the pen, which controls the ruling decision, which now controls how the rest of the country is governed. That's the impact. That's the impact that we see. Now, separately, the leader of the Democrats in the State House up in Texas, Gene Wu, said that the court failed Texas voters and American democracy. He also said, this is what the end of the voting rights looks like. Courts that won't protect minority communities, even when the evidence is staring them in the face. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, who is a minority leader who leads the Democrats in the House, criticized Texas map as, quote, partisan and racially discriminatory power grab designed to subvert the will of the voters, unquote. Once again, when you have power, use it. And they're using it to change policy, because whoever controls the majority controls the pen, and whoever controls the pen controls how the rules are constructed. It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Eric LaVille, and you're joining us for a look at the new decision of the U.S. Supreme Court as we enter in this country what I'm calling the redistricting arms race. Once again, congratulations to all the graduates here at this institution and across the country that are going out into the world to make your mark. Continue to do great and be great, because we here in Norfolk State see the future in you. Now, just earlier, I looked at the U.S. Supreme Court and we talked about first of all, looked at the decision, what it means, its impact, and what this is setting up. Now, what I want to do is look at other states, do an analysis and comparison of other states and where they stand and what they're doing and what this is really going to mean for you as well. So here, according to the Hill, it says, here's where redistricting stands in key states. So we're looking at redistricting wars. Really what they're saying has no signs of waning whatsoever, as several more states, as you see, move toward rewriting congressional lines. So what are they? Florida, Indiana, and yes, the Commonwealth of Virginia. All these states have taken steps to redraw the maps ahead of the 2026 midterms, the latest phase in an ongoing redistricting battle across the country. California as well. But so what we saw where the Supreme Court weighed very heavy on the Texas decision with the GOP-friendly House map, we have other states that are looking to counter this. Now, let's look at what California did. California voters overwhelmingly in this last November election passed Proposition 50. Now, what was Proposition 50? It creates a new Democratic-friendly House map for the midterm elections that would give the party up to 5 pickup opportunities. So, basically, the advantage that was given to Texas by the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, has now been countered by the voters. Again, Governor Abbott said this is what Texas wanted. So now California put it on the ballot and said this is what Californians want, and they voted for it. So it's basically a zero-sum increase, because if Texas gets up to 5 and California gets up to 5, guess what? That means nobody has an advantage anymore. No one has a new advantage. It simply stays as is. Now, keep this in mind. Now, the GOP, which actually redrew maps in Texas, filed a lawsuit after the election, which the Trump administration joined onto, alleging Democrats engaged in, check this out, they said that the Democrats engaged in, quote, unconstitutional racial gerrymandering, unquote, and the state lawmakers violated the Constitution when it drew new congressional district lines based on race, specifically to favor Hispanic voters, without cause or evidence to justify it. Now, we got a federal panel of judges, their whole hearings on December 15th. Now, the very thing that Texas did, which you see that when you take a look at the evidence, it is a racial gerrymandering, whether they say is not in its initial, quote unquote, redrawing of it, it's definitely in its effect. You'll see it clearly. But the Republicans, of course, in the White House are now challenging. California said, you know what, you're doing the exact same thing, but we did it constitutionally, but you're doing it unconstitutionally. This is racial gerrymandering. Now, I'll tell you this, based upon what the court has done in Texas, we don't know how the court's going to rule on this. So this is going to a federal panel, and which means it's a set of judges, federal judges, not just one, that's going to rule on this. Then it's going to be appeal. Whatever, if the decision is against the Republican Party, they're going to appeal it to the U.S. Supreme Court. Once they appeal it to the U.S. Supreme Court, all bets are off. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. So it could be that the U.S. Supreme Court, even though the voters of Texas and the federal panel, which will rule in favor of California, I believe they will, and rule in favor of the voters and their will, I think what's going to end up happening, you get to the Supreme Court, all bets are off. We don't know what's going to happen. So we'll be watching that, what will take place probably before the new year or right in January. Look for the Supreme Court to come back and make a decision on this. So let's take a look at what Indiana is doing. So Indiana Republicans, according to The Hill, were under clear pressure from President Trump and his allies to pass a new set of district lines. Now, though some members of the party have continued to resist those efforts, an Indiana House panel advanced a new map Tuesday and this was earlier this month. They advanced a new map, actually earlier this week, where just one day after those lines were unveiled, the new map goes on before the House for a full vote. Now, the Indiana Senate is expected to convene Monday to make a final decision over redistricting proposals put forward by the State House. But it remains unclear whether enough Senate Republicans will support the new map. Now, once again, it's a lot of pressure here. Again, Indiana is the state of the first vice president for President Trump in his first administration, 45. However, you're talking about states' rights. Texas said, we got the right to do this as a state, California as well. If Indiana refuses, it's because of their states' rights. They got the right to vote as for the people that represent them. Now, will the White House and Republicans across the country support the right of Indiana to, if they choose not to, accept these new maps? Or will they pressure them to do so and tell them, make up some reason as to justify why they should, and also to condemn them for why they did not, if they choose to do so? Once again, everything's up in the air, so we'll see what happens. But let's take a look at what's happening here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Now, Virginia Democrats began the process of moving forward with the new redrawn maps. In this special session that we had here in October, they passed a mid-decade redistricting bill, just like Texas did, just like California did, just like Indiana House did, that allowed lawmakers to initiate the process. Now, here, lawmakers need to pass it one more time in the state legislature, which is going to happen because this cycle, Democrats got a clear supermajority because of the voters in the Commonwealth without redrawn lines, same lines 2 years ago. All right. Just want to point that out. And it's expected to pass easily. Now, that vote will tee up constitutional amendment before voters for a special election, which they're aiming to do in the spring or the summer. A new map is expected to create at least 2 additional Democratic-leaning districts. Now, several Republicans look to block Democrats from advancing their redistricting initiative. However, they've been unsuccessful. And, of course, they don't have the numbers. Once again, whoever controls the majority, controls the pen, controls the momentum, controls the policy, and controls how we're governed. It happened in Texas. It's happening in Congress. It's happening now in California and here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It works for both sides, right? When we see this, more than likely, I believe that those two Democratic-leaning districts will be District 1 and District 2, Congressional District 1 and 2. Where are those at? They are located here. The seat of it, District 2, is Virginia Beach, which Elaine Luria has launched, former U.S. Congresswoman, her bid for re-election, and I believe that she would win anyway, because that district is that district flips more than any congressional district in the Commonwealth. So even the way things are, I think that she would win, and I think because of the Trump administration policies that have impacted this area, especially our military favorite area. So even without redrawing, I think she would definitely win. But District 1, right now, Congressman Rod Whitman, Jen Kiggins represents the 2nd Congressional, but Rod Whitman on the 1st. I believe that when you take a look at that, it definitely would give when you redraw it and look at the adjacent cities, I think that district would definitely lean more Democratic, and Rod Whitman would not, Republican would not be in that area represented. So that means District 1, 2, and 3, Congressman Bobby Scott, the dean of the congressional delegation here in the Commonwealth, would keep his seat. And then, of course, District 4, Congressional District 4, where you have Jennifer McClellan, Congresswoman, elected, first African-American, by the way, here in the Commonwealth. With the seat of it in Richmond, you would see that. So the first 4 congressional districts would lean Democrat and be basically elect a +2. We have several other states, Missouri, North Carolina, Utah, and Florida, and Ohio, and Maryland, New York. Well, let me tell you what's happened in Missouri already. Now, they passed a new House map early this year and amid a push from the White House, National Republicans, and they dismantled, check this out, Emanuel Cleaver's district to give the GOP one additional pickup. Now, here's what's happened. Opponents are working to thwart the new map through litigation, referendum process. The judge is supposed to rule by this Tuesday coming up, whether the referendum can advance. Now, again, this district dismantled one of the Congressional Black Caucus members' districts. So if you say it's not racial gerrymandering, Missouri is a clear example that this is racial gerrymandering, and what the other states are doing are kind of counter what is taking place. Well, once again, whether it's right or wrong, they can do it because it's allowed. But what we really see is that power changes policy, but people can change the policy makers. So therefore, elections have consequences. Make sure you don't thwart your right to vote. Make sure you exercise it at every moment that you can, because if you do so, you will put people in office that can and will create policy that's good for the people. Well, once again, congratulations to all the graduates, and thank you again for joining us here on Stay the Water as we review the redistricting arms race. Be safe. Winter has started. Enjoy your holidays. And join us for the rest of the month of December as we take a look at our Good News series, where we look at organizations and people doing the good work in the community. Once again, be good, be great. God bless, and we'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Carrie Washington, and you're listening to State of the Water with award-winning host Dr. Eric Claville.